Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. This file is being recorded for the August 2022 edition of Socialism for All, and it's an audiobook and discussion of The Working Class and the National Question by Lenin from 1913. If you like this video, please click like and subscribe, and consider supporting on Patreon at patreon.com/socialismforall. You can find a link to Patreon in the video description. So this piece was published in Pravda number 106, May 10, 1913, and published according to that text. The source is Lenin Collected Works, Progress Publishers, 1977, Moscow, Volume 19. Translated by the late George Hanna, HTML transcription and markup by R. Simbala. It's in the public domain at the Lenin Internet Archive within the Marxists Internet Archive. Marxists.org thanks as usual to MIA for hosting this file and thousands of other free Marxist texts. So let's get into the audiobook. Russia is a motley country as far as her nationalities are concerned. Government policy, which is the policy of the landowners supported by the bourgeoisie, is steeped in Black Hundred nationalism. This policy is spearheaded against the majority of the peoples of Russia, who constitute the majority of her population. And alongside this, we have the bourgeois nationalism of other nations, Polish, Jewish, Ukrainian, Georgian, etc., raising its head and trying to divert the working class from its great worldwide tasks by a national struggle, or a struggle for national culture. The national question must be clearly considered and solved by all class-conscious workers. When the bourgeoisie was fighting for freedom together with the people, together with all those who labor, it stood for full freedom and equal rights for the nations. Advanced countries like Switzerland, Belgium, Norway, and others provide us with an example of how free nations, under a really democratic system, live together in peace or separate peacefully from each other. Today, the bourgeoisie fears the workers and is seeking an alliance with the Purishkeviches, with the reactionaries, and is betraying democracy, advocating oppression or unequal rights among nations, and corrupting the workers with nationalist slogans. In our times, the proletariat alone upholds the real freedom of nations and the unity of workers of all nations. For different nations to live together in peace and freedom, or to separate and form different states, if that is more convenient for them, a full democracy, upheld by the working class, is essential. No privileges for any nation or any one language, not even the slightest degree of oppression or the slightest injustice in respect of a national minority. Such are the principles of working-class democracy. The capitalists and landowners want, at all costs, to keep the workers of different nations apart, while the powers that be live splendidly together as shareholders in profitable concerns involving millions, such as the Lenin goldfields. Orthodox Christians and Jews, Russians and Germans, Poles and Ukrainians, everyone who possesses capital, exploit the workers of all nations in company. Class-conscious workers stand for full unity among the workers of all nations in every educational, trade union, political, etc. workers' organization. Let the cadet gentlemen disgrace themselves, this was the main bourgeois party in Russia at the time, by denying or belittling the importance of equal rights for Ukrainians. Let the bourgeoisie of all nations find comfort in lying phrases about national culture, national tasks, etc., etc. The workers will not allow themselves to be disunited by sugary speeches about national culture or national cultural autonomy. The workers of all nations together, concertedly, uphold full freedom and complete equality of rights in organizations common to all, and that is the guarantee of genuine culture. The workers of the whole world are building up their own internationalist culture, which the champions of freedom and the enemies of oppression have for long been preparing. To the old world, the world of national oppression, national bickering, and national isolation, the workers counterpose a new world, a world of the unity of the working people of all nations, a world in which there is no place for any privileges or for the slightest degree of oppression of man by man. That's the end of the audiobook. So I think Lenin in this piece, as with most pieces on the national question, is very clear. So what he's saying here is that when the bourgeoisie was also an oppressed class or had not fully realized its own power, had not fully had the capitalist revolution against feudalism, and was therefore subject to the remaining feudal powers such as the Tsar in Russia, then at that time, the bourgeoisie were freedom fighters, and they were talking about, national equality and all this kind of stuff. But as soon as they achieved more power, and of course the bourgeoisie makes its existence through class exploitation, the bourgeoisie can't exist without the proletariat, which, as capitalism rolls on, expands and expands. It ruins people who were in other, more self-reliant classes and pulls them into the proletariat. That is just what the existence of capitalism does. Well, the bourgeoisie is sitting on top of that, and the bigger it gets, the richer the capitalists get, and they need to maintain that. So what do they do then with all this talk of, freedom and equality? Well, that was useful for getting them into power, but they need to cut it off at a certain point so that this whole freedom and equality thing doesn't, go, quote, too far, and then the workers wind up having a socialist revolution. So this is where they anchor themselves to the overthrown feudalism, kind of keep that in their back pocket as a guarantee against, quote, too much progress from their point of view. That's when Lenin opens saying that government policy in Russia at that time, which is the policy of the landowners supported by the bourgeoisie, is steeped in Black Hundreds nationalism. So the Black Hundreds were extreme reactionaries, they were monarchists, and basically if you look at something like the United States today, you have the Democrats, they say that they're for freedom and equality and human rights, etc., but they could smash the Republicans, who are relatively more socially reactionary, into the dustbin of history by allying with the left and enacting popular reforms, which we saw in something like the Bernie Sanders campaign, are very, very popular. Healthcare, police reform, etc. But it's the same situation, where if they start really going into actual equality, etc., then that would jeopardize their own power. The people who control the party, the 1%, they could lose total control of capitalism at that point if they actually had to contend with the left, former allies in the fight against extreme reaction, MAGA and all that. Well, then what happens? So you've defeated MAGA, you've defeated the Republicans, rather than keeping them afloat year after year after year, election cycle after election cycle. Well, let's say they really went away. Then the Democrats would have to contend with the left as competitors, and the left isn't owned by the big bourgeoisie. Well, that's dangerous for the big bourgeoisie. So, similar principles, as Lenin said, when the bourgeoisie was fighting for freedom together with the people, together with all those who labor, it stood then for full freedom and equal rights for the nations. Today, the bourgeoisie fears the workers and is seeking an alliance with the Purishkeviches, the reactionaries, the far right, and is betraying democracy, advocating oppression or unequal rights among nations, and corrupting the workers with nationalist slogans. So don't be deceived by people today who try to twist and distort this message. Marxism-Leninism is firmly internationalist and anti-nationalist. When we analyze events in society from a Marxist-Leninist lens, we have to ask which class is doing what, for what purpose, and at what stage of historical development. It's true that in early capitalism, before feudalism is fully abolished, the creation of the bourgeois nation state is progressive, generally speaking, and it can result in some liberation from certain kinds of national oppression through that form of organizing. But as the capitalists ascend, what they soon find is that as capitalism gets more and more developed, this is long after feudalism has been overthrown, then the national boundaries become a hindrance to all the trade and eventually imperialism that they need to do. So really at that point, capital doesn't want to be restricted by borders anymore, but they do still serve as potential prisons for the minds of the working class, who the capitalists can keep divided through nationalist slogans, while the capitalists are fully internationalist and have class consciousness as they cooperate with each other in the exploitation of the working class in a fully transnational way. So today, in 2022, are we still at an early stage of capitalism? No. Capitalism turned to imperialism long ago. It became concentrated in just a few hands. It's monopolies. It's highly consolidated. It has for a long time been exporting capital to underdeveloped countries to exploit them. So we're no longer in the age of rising capitalism and the bourgeois nation state being a progressive force. For most of the world, that ship sailed long ago in the course of historical development. So we're now fully in the age of imperialism, highly advanced international capitalism, and workers in whatever nation you may have been born into or find yourself in now need to realize the capitalists reach across those borders constantly to cooperate with each other in exploiting you. What workers need to find now is the international solidarity required to crush the bourgeoisie across the entire world. Capitalism, now more than ever, is threatening massive wars and will continue to do so until such time as it is abolished. Who can do that? Only the working class. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there. What do you think? Leave a question or comment below. We'll pick this up in the comment section as always. Otherwise, thanks for listening, and thanks to the current patrons whose names are on the screen. Again, patreon.com/socialismforall if you'd like to get your name on the screen. That support is immensely helpful and has allowed me to spend a lot more time on this channel. Beyond that, like, share, subscribe, all that stuff helps YouTube to show this content to more people. Thanks again, and we'll catch you in the next video.